welcome to our fifth month of 9 months of our sixth season. And need I remind you all that Bob Bailey started this whole thing, this 19th Century Speaker Series, uh, as we should really do something during this pandemic
Hmm.
to keep ourselves active. And that's how we actually began this in October. Actually, we did that first year. Went from October through May, and then ever since then we've gone September through May, and like an academic year in a sense. Uh, we are very, very pleased and honored tonight to have one of our veteran presenters. There's a
Hmm.
few also veteran presenters in the audience, but we have our veteran presenter tonight, Jack
Hmm.
Bales,
Yeah,
uh, who is down in
good to be here.
am I coming over?
Yes, you're
Yep.
fine.
Oh yeah.
Uh, Jack is down in the Virginia area, and he's a long time the librarian
Yep.
for Mary Washington College
Yep.
and in
Hmm.
Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
actually, we still have this. Well, I'm not retired, but my
Yeah.
brother still has the company. And one of the secretaries there is a graduate of
Oh
your
yeah.
school, and she has
Wow.
been with us for years. And wonderful, wonderful person.
Right. Hmm.
Uh, Jack has been unfolding bit by bit everything about 19th century Chicago baseball.
Hmm.
And his presentation tonight, which is the life and unfortunate times
Hmm.
of Jimmy Wood, who is really, in a sense, Mr. Cub. He was the first
Right.
vice, what we call today, the Cubs, but
Yeah.
they were, of course, the White Stockings back in the day, I
Hmm.
imagine. And so Bob is going to just give you a couple of ground rules, and we will be off and running with Jack's presentation.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, please be ready to mute yourself when the presentation starts so we don't get any ambient news or spouses complaining or attendees calling for another beer. Uh,
Yeah.
if you need during the presentation, uh, you won't be able. Jack won't be able to see the chat, won't be able to ask any questions. However, if you use the chat function, running your cursor down to the bottom for anybody that's new here, click on that. You can type in comments and questions, which will direct to Jack once he's finished with the presentation. Other than that, we're just glad to have you all here. Now, tonight,
Very
as
glad.
Peter mentioned, one of our regular presenters and contributors to the newsletter and various functions and activities for the committee. But Jack has recently, 2020, you retired from
Right.
Mary Marsh
Yeah.
University. Uh,
Hmm.
I also knew a couple of people from Mary Washington when I was in college. So that's 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm.
but nevertheless, Jack has written several books on the 19th century uh, Cubs. Well, they
Hmm.
were never the Cubs until what, about 1913
Oh,
or
two.
something like
Oh,
that. But
oh,
they
two.
never,
Really.
never,
Yeah.
never had that. But it is still that's the team he's going to talk about. Tonight, his topic is baseball's original Mr. Cub, and he's going to talk about Jimmy Wood. So if you want to open your slides, Jack,
Okay.
we'll get that set up and we'll be off and running.
Okay. I'm going to click on share here, right?
Yes,
Click on share and then click on my slides.
right.
And then click on share again, and then get over here to the slideshow, which
Right.
is,
And you just
there we
want to
go.
go to full screen, and you're
Yeah.
all set.
Yep. All set, right?
It should be. You would need to go. There you go. There
There
you
we
are.
go. Okay.
All right, go, Jack.
Okay.
You
Thanks,
got the
everybody.
stage.
Uh, I think I'm going to like this presentation. I think I've got some all new material on Jimmy Wood, including a rather juicy scandal involving his family at the end when he was living in Florida. In fact, it was called the biggest scandal in Orange County history. So a little bit of salaciousness here. Anyway, uh, and we're going. Okay, the New York Clipper called James Jimmy Wood the kingpin of second base, and in their book Baseball Founders, William Rizek and Peter Morris recognized him as a giant of early baseball. But despite this giant status, there were some gaps in what we know about Jimmy Wood, prompting John Thorne in 2014 to call him, quote, a mystery man. For example, both Baseball Reference and Retro Sheet state that he was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1843, but census reports indicate Canada. Concerning his birth date, he was born on December 1. I think we got that ironed out. But for the year, I've come across 1842, 1843, and 1844. In addition, it wasn't until fairly recently that Peter Morris discovered facts about his death, which I'll get into later. And there's kind of a neat thing about that I found out. I've examined the censuses for 1860, 1870, 1880, and 1910. And as I said, baseball and retro sheet go with 1843, which is what the 1860 and 1910 censuses indicate too. He was 16 years old here, which based on his December birth date indicates that he was born in 1843. Now, Jimmy's family settled in Brooklyn, where, as a census report notes, he was an apprentice machinist, but he had quite a bit of spare time, which he spent on the baseball field. And he was a member of the National Association's Harlem Club as early as 1858, and an article in the Brooklyn Daily Times singled him out for his prowess there, adding that the quote, the Harlems have been incessant in their practice in order to vanquish their opponents. And an article on the Chicago Republican notes that at an early age he helped organize the Marians, which was a club in Williamsburg, New York, which is a Brooklyn neighborhood. And the article said that he was both captain and catcher on the Brooklyn team. Now, Wood was still playing for the Marians when he joined the Expert Club of Brooklyn. And in his game day coverage of an October 4th, 1860 game against the New York Empire Club, he did a more than credible job as a brand new member. And again, he was just 16 years old at this time. He'd be 17 just a few months later in December. Now, Wood continued to play well throughout the 1860s, as this article points out in his coverage of a September 1869 game against the Philadelphia Athletics. And as the Brooklyn Daily Times said in July 1862, quote, James Wood has made the position of second base purely his own, but we have yet to see the man that plays it in the manner he does. Now, Wood soon increased his own status in the baseball community. The New York Clipper announced in October 1869 that the Chicago Baseball Club was organized. Jimmy Wood soon agreed to captain the Chicago team, and as his first player signed, he became, in essence, I guess, the first Chicago Cub. And he brought on a number of his old pals from the number of men, including a bunch of his old pals from the Brooklyn Eckford team, including Charlie Hodes, Ed Pinkham, and Fred Tracy, I guess that's how it's pronounced. Tracy. The New York Sun, in a November 25, 1869 article about the signing of the players, mentioned that Wood, quote, is without doubt the best second base player in the country and will receive $2,000 for the playing season. Now, the payroll was rather high, and it seemed that these high salaries were enough to win only games against amateur teams. And the club was soon mocked as the, quote, $18,000 nine. Matters came to a head on July 23rd, 1870, in a game against the New York Mutuals with a 9-0 loss. On that day, the Chicago team became the first member of the National Association to be held scoreless in a professional game. Also, a new word, Chicago, would enter the baseball vocabulary, a synonym for being shut out, as you can see in this article. Now, Jimmy Wood and the Chicago Ball Club knew that something really had to be done, and to bring some much needed leadership into the club's administration. In August 1870, Norman Gassett, who was a clerk of the circuit court at Cook County, was elected president. And within a couple of weeks, catcher and perennial malcontent Bill Craver was let go, accused of gambling, insubordination, and having, quoted, utter disregard of the rules, according to the club's minutes. As the book Baseball in Our Old Chicago points out, the pieces of the ball club were all starting to, quote, gel properly. And on August 30th, the White Stockings beat the Brooklyn Athletics 12-4. No small feat, considering that the Athletics in June had given Cincinnati its first loss in more than a year. Chicago players followed this victory with a 13-6 win over the Forest City Club of Rockford, Illinois. The Chicago Tribune praised not only the team's superb fielding and batting, but also the quote, its perfect harmony, goodwill, and discipline. And these were the very same characteristics that sports writers were found lacking in the team earlier in the spring. Now, when Jimmy Wood was tasked to form a baseball club, one of the objectives was establish a team that could beat the so-called the arrogant Cincinnati Red Stockings, who were, winning all over the place. And they did indeed. And after the second game on October 13th, 1870, a 16-13 Chicago victory, the Cincinnati Daily Gazette wrote, quote, "We were beaten. We know it. We feel it. But how could we help it? The umpire was against us. The weather was against us. The crowd was against us. The heavens were against us. The ground was against us. The pestilential air of the Chicago River was against us. The Chicago Nine was against us. And last but not least, the score was against us." Furthermore, the White Stockings went on a winning streak, and at the end of the season, and they won baseball's championship. Now, in early 1871, the San Francisco Chronicle noted that Jimmy Wood had organized a very strong team, but also, and it said, quote, "it promises to be harmonious, an important element of success in any baseball nine." And they certainly were successful with a 10-8 win against Boston on September 29th. Chicago was tied with Philadelphia at the top of the National Association, with each team having 18 victories and just 7 losses. Chicago players were looking forward to another game with the Athletics on October 17th. But they never really made it to the train station. There was this little matter of a fire, and not just any fire. After a blaze broke out on Sunday evening, October 8th, in Patrick and Catherine O'Leary's barn on Chicago's west side, it did not take long for it to incinerate 3 1/3 square miles of the heart of the city. Included among the property destroyed was the White Stockings Park, its ball grounds, and the possessions of most, but not all, of the players too. And Captain Jimmy Wood turned his full attention to his team members and their jobs. He wrote the New York Clipper and asked that it publicize the Chicago team's predicament so that his players could sign new contracts. And it did just that. The New York Clipper on October 21 wrote that they had received a letter from Jimmy Wood, and that because of the fire and the Chicago Club grounds being destroyed, quote, "all the players now connected with the club and those engaged for 1872 are released from their engagements and free to seek service in other clubs." And the White Stockings played a few games before the season ended in the end of October. Their first stop was Troy, New York. The fire prevented them from playing an October 12th game at home with the Haymakers. So they faced off on October 21, the White Stockings, in a real motley assortment of borrowed and mismatched clothing. Here's Jimmy Wood with the arrow there. The White Stockings won this game, but lost the second. They played a few more games, but they limped home and finished the season in 3rd place, but a win-loss record still, though, of 19-9. Now, Jimmy Wood played for the Haymakers in 1872 and proved to be a very valuable member of the team. Halfway through the season, though, the team ran into financial difficulties and disbanded in August. Jimmy and some of the Haymakers joined his old team, the X-Birds, in Brooklyn. And in his first game with Jimmy on board, they beat Baltimore by the score of 10-1. The Brooklyn Eaglin wrote that Wood managed by, quote, skillful maneuvering to bring his nine out of the contest victorious. And here was another example of the importance of having an efficient man at the wheel. And he did have an efficient man at the wheel with Jimmy. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough, and the Brooklyn Eckfords finished their final season with a record of 3 wins and 26 losses. Jimmy was the player captain of the Philadelphia White Stockings in 1873. Unfortunately, the players' hearts really just weren't in it in their game toward the end of the season, and they lost 9 of their last 13 games. But that would soon be of little concern to Jimmy. New White Stocking president Norman Gazette, who really was kind of Mr. Cub when it came to an administrator, I guess. He was a leader known for asserting authority and taking charge. He set off for the East, and he swore that he would go bring back some players, and he did exactly that. In August 1873, Chicago's newspapers announced his big news. He had engaged a White Stocking team for 1874. And Jimmy was naturally elated at this new opportunity. He settled down in Chicago then. He opened a cigar store at 101 22nd Street. White Stocking stockholders held a meeting there, as you can see here, and on January 12th. And during the season, baseball fans would congregate there. They were able to buy tickets there. It was kind of a meeting place there. And the Chicago Inter-Ocean newspaper wrote, in fact, that, quote, Jimmy Wood has now established himself in business in this city. His place will be a general rendezvous for baseball fans. He expanded his business and he opened a sporting goods store in Chicago State Street. And by the way, note the name of E.F. Dexter at the bottom here. From my research in Chicago, I immediately recognized his name. That's Edward F. Dexter, and he was the treasurer of the White Stockings team. And my first thought, he may have been like the financial advisor or maybe the money man behind this business. Now, this is pure conjecture on my part, but I just see it's interesting that his name is there. That's all. By the way, he was a Chicago businessman. He was a Chicago bookseller, Edwin Dexter was. Now, disaster struck the White Stockings in Chicago in 1871 with the Chicago fire. It would hit Jimmy in particular during the 1873-1874 off season, probably in April 1874. He had used his pocket knife to lance an abscess on his left thigh, but before he could clean the blade, he dropped the blade. He dropped the knife, I should say, which fell on his right leg below the knee with all that abscess on the blade. Infection set in. They didn't have antibiotics back then, and he was forced to remain at home, unable to play baseball, and consequently, the White Stockings had to begin their season without him as captain and without a second baseman. Uh, uh, Jimmy Wood's absence certainly made a difference, coupled with the poor performance of some of the other players. The Chicago Tribune complained in late June that players were, quote, wandering listlessly through the eastern states, conquering an insignificant club here and there, and being conquered by everyone in which it would be an honor to defeat. On July 6, 1874, the White Stockings were fifth among the 8 teams in the National Association with a win-loss record of 9-15. Things got worse 4 days later when Jimmy Wood had to have his right leg amputated due to complications resulting from his cut and his infection. The Tribune related that it would definitely be sad news for Jimmy's many fans, adding, quote, by his forced withdrawal from the diamond field, the national game loses one of his best, most honorable, and most gentlemanly players. And the article went on to say that baseball should give him a benefit game, which would help him with his many expenses. And that's exactly what happened. There was an exhibition game between the White Stockings and the Brooklyn Athletics on July 29th in Chicago. The Chicago Daily Tribune wrote that a host of his friends nobly responded. And that they assisted with his financial problems. Not only did several thousand people pay tickets to see the game, but it netted Jimmy more than $3,000, which was a lot of money for this very highly respected second baseman of the Chicago club. Wood, of course, could no longer play baseball, though he's in fairly good spirits and in very good health, fairly good health too. And one sport, in fact, that's what I've noticed in all my Jimmy Wood research. He was pretty much of an upbeat guy, and he is very, very well respected across the baseball industry. He was, after he retired, he corresponded with so many people in baseball. But anyway, one sports writer wrote, quote, sitting in a cigar store on 22nd Street or nimbly hopping about on his crutches with a comely stump, swinging in midair, he doesn't present the appearance of one who has seen suffering in the severest kind, unquote. The White Sox never posted much of a threat in 1874. They ended the season number 5 out of 8 teams, 18 and a half games out of first place. A Tribune reporter optimistically summed up their performance. Quote, the Chicago's made but a poor showing in the race, but hope to do better next year, next time. As a Cubs fan, I've heard that variations of that many times over the years. Do better next year. And towards that end, the White Stockings club secretary, William Hulbert, sent Jimmy Wood out east to sign players for 1875. And Wood told a reporter in late 1874 that the club had selected players for, the club had selected players, quote, and next year we will be able to boast a 9 equal to that of Boston. So William Hulbert was really behind Jimmy Wood all the time here. And I poured over all, I think just about all of the William Hulbert, Jimmy Wood, the White Stockings correspondence there at the Chicago History Museum. I know Mike Halpert is here, and he and I have talked about this before. All the letters that are there. Anyway, I noticed that Jimmy talked to quite a few, and he talked to so many amateur clubs. They were setting up ball games to play. And Club Secretary William Hulbert told National Association Secretary Nick Young in early 1875 that, quote, we are going to send Wood to St. Louis next week to arrange 4 games with them. So Jimmy did a lot of this type of contact that you can see here. Unfortunately, the White Sox ended the 1874 season once again floundering in the middle of the National Association's standings. The Boston Red Stockings, thanks to the stellar pitching of Albert Spalding, secured their 3rd consecutive pennant. Now, William Hulbert still had faith in Jimmy Wood, and here he tells the National Association Minister Nick Young that Jimmy will continue to be employed by the White Stockings. He makes that clear. In fact, he emphatically tells him that Wood will be working during the following year. 1875, and a newspaper noted that the club officials' responsibilities, quote, will be greatly lightened by the competent services of Jimmy Wood, who will be manager of the club, responsible directly to the president. John Glenn played for the White Stockings from 1874 to 1877, and here William Hulbert informs him to wait instructions from manager Jimmy Wood. By the way, I recently finished a book on the 1880s White Stockings. It'll be called, tentatively called, the Cubs' first dynasty, Chicago's reign in the 1880s baseball. And I went through the William Hulbert correspondence, and there's a famous quotation about, I'd rather be on a lamp post in Chicago than a streetcar in any other place. And I found a couple other, what do they call them, bon mots by William Hulbert. One time he says something to the effect that I can make a living in baseball on a desert island while other people couldn't, living in a city of 1 million. So that he's got a lot of things like that I came across. Um, And here, a Kentucky baseball club official in May 1875, again, writes manager Jimmy Wood about setting up a game with the Chicago club. And again, I come across many of these letters. Jimmy Wood was a very competent secretary and man for William Hulbert. Again, he set up games. He on both sides. He set up games for the Chicago to play, and he arranged for these other teams to come to Chicago. But this would all soon change. In the summer of 1875, Secretary Hulbert signed Boston's ace pitcher Albert Spalding for 1876. And Spalding would not only join the White Stockings as field manager or the captain, replacing the non-playing manager Jimmy Wood, but it would also assume the club's secretarial responsibilities. As for Hulbert, he assumed the presidency of the White Stockings after President George Gage died in September 1875. Now, Mike Halpert has written extensively on SABR on William Hulbert and the early Cubs, and he's talks about this item right here in his online writings, and I have talked about this. This directly contradicts Spalding's autobiography, in which he talks about how Hulbert came to him to set up working, and this was in early 1875, he says, but actually Spalding contacted William Hulbert. The White Sox finished in sixth place in 1875. The future didn't look very bright for Jimmy in 1876. Baseball was his life, of course, and it didn't sit well with him not to be on hand. As one reporter wrote after Jimmy had his leg amputated, quote, "It was painful indeed to see that model second baseman who had led the old Eckfords to the head of the list in 1867 on one leg." It was not only painful for him to be on baseball sidelines, on crutches too, of course, but he was also pushed to the sidelines by the club itself, what with Albert Spalding taking over. And by the way, not surprisingly, Wood knew Spalding. In September 1874, Jimmy told an interviewer that, quote, "Spalding of the Bostons was in Chicago last Thursday, and he called upon me. He posted me on baseball matters down east." As I said, Jimmy kept in contact with a lot of people. What might also have been painful for Jimmy was the White Sox winning the pennant in 1876 without him on the field, and no Spalding's photograph on the upper line drawing, I guess that is, on the upper center. And of course, there is no inclusion of Jimmy Wood. Now, those in baseball sympathize with Wood and his predicament. And as much as I love researching and writing about him, the guy had quite a few faults too. And then many recognize his manager. He was a great player, but he's not, could have been a better manager, I guess you could say. They recognize his managerial shortcomings and believe that Chicago would be better off with somebody else. And the New York Clipper said that as a captain, he, quote, "was not as successful as he was a player." Uh, he lacked one or two of the essentials of an able general of a baseball nine. And the New York Clipper didn't say what those essentials were, but they did say that, it was few good players made it as successful managers or baseball captains. Other writers, though, were really more specific. As early as 1871, newspaper articles mentioned that he was excitable, with one saying that was his big fault, his worst fault. He was excitable. It said he always wanted to win, the paper said, but at times, quote, "he loses much of his effectiveness by the excitability produced by over anxiety." And note that here in Spalding's guide, it refers to him as a very nervous player. He'd also lose his temper. He lost his temper quite a bit, I guess, too. The New York Clipper reported in 1873 that Wood fumbled a double play, and after he threw the ball down in disgust, and an opposing player ran in to score, and that, quote, amid renewed laughter and jeers and general loose play all around, 4 runs were added to the score, none earned. Multiple articles pointed out that he was way too easygoing for his own good, and that should have been much more strict with his players. The New York Clipper wrote in 1874, although Wood, quote, works like a beaver to win, he is too easygoing and confiding, and errand knaves get the best of him. The St. Louis Globe-Democrat said in 1875, quote, the ill success of this year's 9 is attributable to his leniency to the players, which is truly a part of bad management. Okay, Wood was off the Chicago team, but he was not out of baseball. For early in the 1876 season, it was announced that he would umpire games in the area. And again, he knew his stuff as an umpire. Newspaper articles of the time show that he umpired both professional and amateur games. And he was nicknamed Woodsy, by the way. The conscientious, so nicknamed Woodsy, enjoyed being back on the ball field, and journalists occasionally mentioned him. In one game, a White Stocking player performed rather poorly on the field, prompting a sports writer to say that, quote, he made an awful exhibition of himself and not near as good as Jimmy Wood would be, even with his cork leg. I mentioned that Jimmy Wood was an excitable player. In one game, a local newspaper said that although Woods was a satisfactory umpire, an opposing player declared that on one occasion he got so, quote, he got so mixed up that he scratched his wooden leg in despair, period. This, however, the article went on, is an unwarranted and unproved assertion. But he did a good job as an umpire, and in August, the White Stockings recommended that he serve as an official league umpire for 1877. He also organized at least one tournament for minor league teams in 1877, in which the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, the Syracuse Stars, the Indianapolis Blues, and other clubs participated. Now, at this point, Jimmy really started bouncing around the country, and it was just awful while I was researching this to kind of keep track of him. Uh, as Peter Morris and William Rizek, I hope that's how you pronounce his name, point out in their really fine essay on Jimmy Wood in the book Baseball Founders, after Jimmy lost his leg, quote, he embarked on a series of new adventures. In 1882, he moved close to Stark, Florida, where he purchased an orange plantation and also raised peaches. Well, his attempt at citrus growing was apparently not profitable. For in 1884, he was back in Chicago, and a year later, he ran a laundry business in Memphis, Tennessee, a laundry business for old Jimmy Wood. In 1888 and 1899, he was managing the Memphis Grays, a team in the minor league Southern League, which was formed in Atlanta in 1885. The league was, if you know anything about this league, it was perpetually faced with financial difficulties. It'd be in one year and out the next, occasionally collapsed and then started back up. In 1889, it fielded only 4 teams and collapsed again in the middle of the season, reorganizing in 1892. In 1890, Jimmy was keeping the ballpark there in Memphis in good condition for the use of baseball clubs practicing in the area. One supervisor wrote that, quote, some games there would pay, Jimmy thinks, as the town has had no ball for some time, end quote. Oh, then the newspaper also said, quote, the veteran is still engaged in the laundry business in Memphis, unquote. He was also engaged in business himself, and in early 1890, he managed this Jackson Mound Park in Memphis. That's the best picture I could find of this. And he invested in an opera company that performed at the pavilion. This amusement park featured 2 large mounds with a bandstand and a dance pavilion built on the largest mound, and a bowling alley, a shooting gallery, and a restaurant in the whole surrounding area. And this park originally belonged to the Chickasaw, a 16th century Native American tribe, and the 2 mounds were ceremonial ones. The park is now known as the Chickasaw Heritage Park. But let's get back to Jimmy Wood here. The public loved the opera show. They loved Jimmy Wood, but the company got most of the money. There were other activities at the pavilion. That there were dances, there were band concerts, and there were athletic exercises, but the venture was not a profitable one. A baseball player friend of Jimmy said that, quote, he was unlucky in Memphis and never made money there. He came here with good role, and though he had friends by the thousands, which he did, his ventures always turned out badly for himself. The opera show ran for 2 seasons, and then Jimmy moved back to Chicago, where he and former White Stocking ball player Ed Williamson opened a saloon and restaurant on Dearborn Street called the Wigwam. They remained partners until Williamson's death in 1894. And by the way, I've been really working hard researching Ed Williamson for my book, and he was not a good person to open a bar with. I think he had cirrhosis of the liver when he died, and he hit well in 1884. He led the league in home runs there in 1884, but he shouldn't have opened that bar. Uh, Jimmy would continue to bounce around the country, something of a habit of his. The SABR Biographical Research Committee wrote in July-August 2006 that, quote, in our long and fruitless search for wood, we had tracked him to Quebec, to New York, Ohio, Illinois, Tennessee, Louisiana, Florida, and even Pennsylvania, unquote. In 1908, he was living in Manhattan, excuse me, and a couple of years later, he was living in Winter Park, Florida, where most of my next part of my story is going to take place. Uh, Newspapers in 1914 reported him as deceased, but as one supervisor humorously put it, quote, he arises in his own behalf to announce that the report was slightly exaggerated. Jimmy announces that he is getting along nicely, and he may even join the Chicago Feds in baseball. Interestingly enough, Jimmy stayed with baseball in a peripheral way in later life. Let's backtrack a bit into his personal life. He was 21 years old when he married Sarah E. Perrine in 1865 in Washington County, Ohio. She was born in 1844 on Staten Island in New York. They had 2 children, Carrie Lee Wood and James Leon Wood Jr. James got married and had a daughter. James Jr. got married and had a daughter. But here I'm going to spend my time with their daughter, Carrie. The rest of this talk is going to be about, well, Carrie and back to Jimmy, of course. Okay, here we get into some meaty stuff here, everybody. Now, daughter Carrie married William Chase Temple in 1884. Jimmy Wood had a lot in common with his son-in-law. Jimmy may have failed as a citrus grower, but Temple was a real citrus baron. He bought an estate in Orange Grove and Winter Park and developed the Florida Citrus Exchange with other citrus growers to help the entire Orange Grove industry. He started a lumber and timber company, made a success of that, became a prominent lumber baron. And Jimmy must have taken notice of Temple's interest in baseball. Bob Bailey talked about the various cups in baseball and talked about the Temple Cup at one of our last meetings. Well, anyway, William Temple was the president and the part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates from 1891 to 1893. He donated a 30-inch silver trophy, later called the Temple Cup, to the National League, and the first and second league teams would play a postseason best-of-7 series, and the trophy be awarded to the winner. And this was given for 4 years from 1894 to 1897, and the trophy is now in baseball's Hall of Fame. Okay, here's some stuff to keep in mind, everybody. Okay, by the summer of 1924, Jimmy was 80 years old now, and he was pretty much alone. As you can see here, his wife, Sarah, she's dead, having died of typhoid and pneumonia at just age 49. Their son, James Jr., he died in 1923. His son-in-law, William Chase Temple, he died in 1917. And Temple's wife, Carrie, Jimmy's and Sarah's daughter, she died on June 11th, 1924. The rest, they're all dead, except for Jimmy and now his granddaughter. Baseball, though, would again enter Jimmy's orbit when in 1942 his granddaughter, Dorothea Temple, keep her in mind, she's the bad person here coming up. She's the black sheep of the family coming up here. But anyway, she married Adalbert Dell Mason, formerly a pitcher for the Washington Senators and the Cincinnati Reds. So we're back in baseball again. I wish I could have found out what Jimmy thought about all this. Okay. Now, Florida newspapers were rocked with quite a bit of scandal following Carrie's death in 1924. Daughter Dorothea Temple, now Dorothea Temple Mason, was the principal, though not the sole heir of her parents' vast estate, which was valued at $250,000, not the mere $150,000 in this front page headline. Also, when Mr. Temple died, he left paid up insurance policies valued at $750,000. And Dorothea wanted her hands on it all. She and her husband, former baseball player Del Mason, contested the will, which was signed 10 days before her mother's death on the grounds that her mother had the will drawn up and signed under the, quote, improper and undue influence, unquote, of Carrie's friend, a woman named Charlotte Bourne. I have her name down here at the bottom of this slide, who was set to inherit $30,000 to $60,000 of jewels, as well as quote unquote valuable laces. So again, Jimmy's still alive at this point, but the child of his daughter Carrie is Dorothea Temple. His granddaughter, I should say, is Dorothea Temple Mason here. Now, keep this person in mind, everybody. This is Jimmy's caregiver later in life, Dorothea Miller. She's at the bottom of the page here, age 47 now. She testified for the defense that she had known Jimmy Wood, Carrie's father, for about 10 years, declaring that at Carrie's request and expense, she had cared for Jimmy during the past 7 years. She was also a companion to Carrie. So she was a companion to Carrie. Carrie, in fact, brought her in, and she was a caregiver to Jimmy. No, 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 said the prosecution. They said that she had been ordered out of the house for, quote, improper conduct, and they asked her if she had given Jimmy any massages. She vehemently denied all these accusations. In fact, her response to this question in the newspapers was an emphatic absolutely not. Again, remember this name, Dorothea Miller, the caregiver. This comes up later. Now, these court proceedings lasted for 5 weeks, and it was all front page news in the Florida newspapers with multiple lawyers involved, many people testifying. The transcripts amounted to 1,080 typed pages. And I got the impression from the newspaper articles, there were so many newspaper articles about this, that it came as no surprise when the judge ruled against the Masons, against Dorothea, their petition to contest the will. For her part, Dorothea came out of it looking not so good, especially when the papers reported that she had had an affair with the family doctor. And I guess it broke up when her father pointed out that the doctor would be hard pressed to keep her in the style to which she had become accustomed. One newspaper said that, quote, the proceedings have been the longest and the case admittedly the most important ever heard in Orange County. And I learned, and William Bryzik and Peter Morris corroborate this in their very fine essay on Jimmy Wood, that he spent time in New York, Florida, and New Orleans, and they mentioned he had a productive life despite all these adversities of losing a leg for starters, and then losing his wife, the daughter, and his son. Baseball was always on Jimmy's mind, and I came across many, many articles in which sports writers commented on letters they got from him. He kept in touch with a lot of people. He had a wide circle of baseball friends, and he kept in touch with them, including Al Spink, the founder of the Sporting News, was a frequent correspondent. In 1916, Jimmy sat down with this sports writer, Frank Menke, who interviewed him for a series of 6 syndicated articles published in August. He also kept in touch with White Stocking organizer Tom Foley. He was a business manager for the original White Stockings. He kept in touch with a bunch of former players. If you want to read these series, John Thorne reprinted them in his Our Time blog. Now, I tracked down his death certificate that I have here. Bill and Peter noted in the Jimmy Wood essay that he was living in New Orleans when he went to San Francisco to have cataract surgery. There were some complications and he died there. And perhaps I get the impression that his caregiver, Dorothea Miller, had traveled with him, as she is listed here on this funeral home record as the informant. Note that pneumonia contributed to his death. And note here, by the way, that his birth date is given as 1842, not 1843. That is in the census. So Dorothea Miller traveled to, I guess, she must have traveled to New Orleans to be with him because she was the informant with all of this. As I said, there's some confusion about Jimmy Wood's life, especially about his later years. Here's a page, for example, from RIP Baseball. Jimmy Wood's son died in 1923 in New Orleans. I could not find where he is buried. Jimmy and Sari's daughter, Carrie, died in Winter Park, Florida. That's where Jimmy was living when all the scandal was taking place. She is buried there. We talk about here. See the name Dorothea Miller? She's there. You'll recognize the name of Dorothea Miller as that is the name of Jimmy's caregiver. This, of course, really, really surprised me. She is buried in Jimmy Wood's grave plot. She was 52 when she died, and apparently she is buried with him. So, Jimmy's wife died in Chicago, and most sources say she was buried there. Ancestries says Pittsburgh, where she lived at one time and where both of her children were born. It gives a birth date of 1843 in this family tree. But even the census records on this ancestry record indicate 1844. As I said, John Thorne called Jimmy Wood a mystery man, and the mystery still continues. One can't help wonder why Jimmy and Sarah, why weren't they buried together? And why was his caretaker? Well, the caretaker was living in New Orleans, and she was the informant. So I don't know, but she is buried, presumably buried at the gravesite 2 years after his death. And by the way, concerning Dorothea Miller, she was no relation to him. She testified in the Florida court that she was in a restaurant in 1914 or 1915 when Jimmy and his son entered, and a friend introduced her to them. She stayed in touch with both him, Jimmy, and his daughter, Carrie, and eventually became a companion to her and a caregiver to him, and presumably stayed with him until he died. Anyway, as I said, the mystery continues. It seems that more research needs to be done, but I had a good time working on this Jimmy Wood project and wrapping some things here on a baseball note. Here are a couple of entries from Baseball Reference. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, he's some character.
Yeah, he was a real character, wasn't he?
Not only a character, but he was a fine ball player apparently
Yes.
in his prime, and managing wasn't quite his strong suit. If you take your slides down,
Yeah, I sure will. Here, escape here. Just X out, right?
Yeah, that's
Over
fine.
here. Yeah, right over here. Okay. Here
There
we
we
go.
go. Okay. Let me get the view back down. Here we are. There's a couple of comments. Kevin Doyle asked early in your talk as you were going through, did Jimmy serve during the Civil War? I think he would have been of age. Bruce Allardyce responded during the talk that not to my knowledge, Bruce keeps a listing of the people who played in the majors. and served the Civil War, but that Jimmy Wood was not one of them. He currently has a list of
Thanks, Mike.
40
Hmm.
Civil War veterans who did play Major League Baseball. Mike Halpert made a comment when you were talking about the
Thanks,
benefit
Mike.
game,
Yeah.
33,000 was in, he said was a lot of money in
Yeah. Yeah.
1874.
Yeah. Mike would know.
He says that was
Yeah.
$950,000 today. That's a big number. That's a big number.
I wonder
Uh,
if that's a typo or something. That is a lot of money to
Yeah,
raise,
it is
Yeah.
a big number. But regardless, though, it was, three. I want to say that uh, workers were making what, $300 to $800 a year, or something in that range, and that was kind of the average for most folks. Richard Smiley makes a note on Hulbert, while not yet president, was in charge of the team by the fall of 1874, and George Gage was a figurehead president. And a number of well, a question from Bruce Allardyce. Did Miller handle Jimmy's probate slash estate, and is that why they're buried together with her purchasing of a joint plot?
I don't know that. After I finished this, I said this would be something I wouldn't mind pursuing. I don't know how difficult that would be, but have to, but I could. No, I got this court records. I could pursue that in San Francisco, but I just don't know the answer to that at all. But there's got to be some sort of story there why she's buried there and everything. Yeah,
Karen hollering, if you would unmute yourself. She's got her hand raised for a question. There
yeah,
you go.
Karen.
Go ahead, Karen.
Great presentation.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks,
If
Mike.
you were to make
Everybody.
if you were to make a movie,
Yeah, yeah.
who would you have as the actor? Who would you have in the movie?
Well, I think for Carrie, the granddaughter, I think Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, she'd be pretty good for that, I think, Yeah. I like it, you guys. Yeah. Yeah.
Richard Smiley also has hand. Richard, if you'd unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. First, just thanks, Jack, very much for the presentation. Really
Thank you,
enjoyed it.
Richard. Thank you.
One small compliment, and then I'll get to my other comment slash question. The compliment is thank you for referring to Ed Williamson as Ed Williamson and not Ned Williamson,
Oh,
because
yes.
when we in Chicago got around to doing a reburial for him or a new
Yeah.
marker for him, I was tasked with like doing some research on him. And I went in there thinking, oh, okay, I'll look for Ned Williamson. And I really couldn't find much on Ned. And I kept
Yeah.
finding Ed old time.
Yeah.
I realized, oh, I they didn't call him Ned Williamson. They called him Ed. And as near as I can tell, the Ned at one point, his name was Edward Nagel Williamson.
That's
And
right.
at one point, that some newspapers would refer to him as Ed N. Williamson. And
Oh,
I
no, I didn't
think
know
the
that.
N and the Ed got switched. And
Switch. I
that's
had no
where,
idea.
for half a year, the Tribune called him Ned. And it like
Uh-huh.
propagated for half a year and then it disappeared.
I did not know that. That's great.
That's where so it was like
Yeah.
Ed. So thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Appreciate
Yeah.
that.
And tell
My,
Bruce Hardig um,
yeah.
Ed Hardig, I said hi. He's
Yeah.
he and I correspond all the time.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Helps us a lot with getting meetings and
Yes.
stuff at Wrigley Field. Like my real question relates
Yes,
to
Mary.
I know when I remember I was in SABR. I remember it was a big thing when Peter Morris discovered where Jimmy Wood was buried. I
Yes.
assume you were around too. Did you
Uh-huh.
reach out to Peter about some of these questions, like the one Bruce had, or just to find out the circumstances? Because it's been a long time. I just remember the news of the discovery, but I don't remember the details of how did
Well,
he find that out? What led him to conclude that's where he's buried? And
Well, funny you said that because years ago I emailed Peter and of course he promptly responded back. In fact, I talked to Bob Bailey last week and I asked him if he was still a member because I looked him up in the directory because I wanted to ask him some of these things, but I couldn't find his name there. And I meant to ask someone whether they had his email address because I would have liked to have
Mhm.
contacted him, but I don't know if he's still a member. I should try it again looking
Yeah,
for it. Yeah. Because he kind of, you know, he's kind of the guru when it comes to when it comes to
yeah.
Jimmy Wood, I think.
Because I always remember that as being one of the most famous, you know, discoveries. Even was mentioned, biographical research. We found Jimmy
I know
Wood.
it. I
It
have that
wasn't
out. I printed
trivial.
out that article in the newsletter about they found Jimmy Wood. You
Yeah.
know,
So
Mary mentioned something about the Mr. Cub and his caregiver. Yeah, Ernie Banks had a sad life too. Toward the
yeah,
end there is got taken to the cleaners. He lost his 500th home run ball and everything, and it got
yeah.
sold or whatever. Yeah,
Beautiful grave though. But oh
yeah.
well. So thank you.
Okay, I'll contact him,
Uh,
Matt. Thanks. Okay.
Jack, Mike Halpert clarified my range of what average workers are. It said a factory worker in 1874 working 60 hours a week would earn about $360 a year. So $3,000, 10 times the average
Wow.
salary
Yes. Uh-huh.
of someone. Uh, and Wood kept busy. I mean, he was may not have made a lot of money in some of the business, but he always had business and
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
cash. I guess cash coming in.
Yeah. Well, the newspaper articles, I didn't see everything toward the end of his life, but he was a pretty happy guy. He was content, and everything.
Uh,
Thanks everybody for all your good comments and everything else. I had a lot of fun.
Matt Alberson makes a note. Justin McKinney corresponds with Peter Morris, and
I
just
may make a
contact
note of that.
Justin, and you might be able to
I will make a note of that, in
get touch
fact.
with that.
Yeah.
Uh, Peter, if you want to give us our close, and thank you again, Jack. It was
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
awfully fun presentation.
It was a fun thing, I thought. Yeah. That's what I thought. Thanks, everybody. Mhm.
Jack, you got many, many uh,
Thank you.
compliments
Well,
on
thanks,
that
everybody.
presentation. I saw them
Yeah.
coming up
Oh, good.
on the chat.
Y'all
And
made
I
my
can
day.
say, and I just want to say it was a really, really great presentation.
Thank you.
And you got into such, you dug in and did the research, and obviously.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I guess you're becoming Mr. Cub. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Me or Mike. Mhm.
All right.
Okay.
So moving on, I want to say that we have another old kind of veteran now, Vince Sciamamella, who is going to make a presentation on the Pittsburgh Keystones and a 19th century black team. And Vince is really a kind of an expert on Pittsburgh area baseball, and particularly 19th century baseball. But he's all things Pittsburgh, and he'll be with us next month on the. I just want to double check our date. Um, will be in again the second Tuesday in February. Okay, and then we have later in that month,
That
Matt
would be the
Albertson
10th.
will be coming around again to do a book discussion on Jerry Casaway's book on Ed Delahanty, which is a wonderful book. And as you all know, Matt does a great job every time. So we're kind of got a busy month next month with two presentations. And our Fred is moving along at incredible pace. So I don't know. I, I wish we had more room in the Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
We're getting there. All right. So thank you all very much for joining us. We'll see you all next month. Where Bob Bailey kind of gets us signed in, and thank you again for everybody for joining us. See you then.
Good night,
Thank
all.
you. Good night, everybody. Thank you again.
Nay.